Welcome to MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Cherni. Jean has a wealth of career experiences, and she's currently a senior living consultant as well as a columnist for the New Haven Register. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you so much, Georgiana. Pleasure to be here.
And please talk a little bit about what being a senior living consultant does.
Well, I'm old enough to be my own client. However, what I do primarily is help people once they've decided to make a move. Perhaps their house that they're in is too large, they've lost a husband or another partner, and they decide they have to make a change. Sometimes it's even to another town where to be close to their children. But there's a lot involved, from getting rid of the accumulation of a lifetime, and that's difficult because everything has a memory. Also just deciding which community would be a good fit, almost like choosing a college, really. Finding what's the one where I'm going to be comfortable and where is it affordable for me. So there's a lot involved, and we try to ease that whole process.
Where do the adult children fit in?
Well, the adult children sometimes are the first people to call. Very often after a holiday, they will notice that mom or dad is not doing well. Perhaps they've been speaking to them on the phone, and now they're at the house and they see signs of neglect or no food in the refrigerator. The problem is, very often the children try to change things immediately. I've had a lot of friends say, I wish my daughter would stop trying to be my mother. It takes patience, it takes time. They have to introduce the subject gently, and really the decision has to be up to that senior as to what they're comfortable with.
Do you end up playing a little bit of psychologist?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you do. You try. I think for the adult children, they have to learn to be more patient, not try to take over, just suggest, and sometimes they can point out interim steps that might be helpful. Maybe a certain amount of gourmet meals could be delivered if mom or dad isn't cooking. Maybe there's some transportation that could be arranged so the person could get to a local activity if they're no longer driving. Sometimes you can do it in incremental steps.
Are you involved with staying in touch with what these different services are in the different communities?
Yes, very much so, because of the column that I write every Sunday in the Register for seniors. I'll get a lot of calls, and I've lived here a long time, so I'm very aware of various organizations and various facilities that can help people, yes. So I do that as a goodwill kind of thing for the senior community.
That's wonderful. And speaking of the senior community, and you're saying you're old enough to be one of your own clients, and you are, 88?
88.
Right.
I had a birthday recently, and I was in disbelief myself. I went to bed one night and I was 65, and the next morning there I was at 88. But I'm very fortunate. I love my work. And I think one should not set limits on oneself because you reach a certain age. That really is immaterial. It's what are you able to do? What would you like to do? In fact, there's a very good saying, I don't know who to attribute it to, but I always remember it, which goes something like, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? And I think a lot of us stop because we're afraid of failing.
You recently spoke about the myths and realities of aging, right?
Yes.
So what are some of the contradictions that aging brings?
Well, again, I think people feel that if they reach a certain age, and I think this is because of our media does this to us. If you pick up any fashion magazine, they'll have clothes for 30, 40, and then at 50, I don't know, you drop off a cliff. There's nothing after that. Even our president-elect has chosen to rate women on a scale of 1 to 10 simply based on their looks. So aging in America is very difficult, particularly for women. We're not supposed to age, and yet the only way to grow old is to age. I don't think they've discovered any other way to grow old other than age. Of course, for most of us, old is always 15 years older than we are.
Right.
I feel very strongly if you set limits on yourself, you become your own worst enemy. It's a self-prophecy. I have never said at my age I can't or at my age I shouldn't. And certainly we all have physical barriers. So no, I can't ski down a hill anymore, but there's a lot that I can do.
And you had recently shared that you're going, I don't know, you're going on a trip to Sedona?
Yes,
Right? With
yes.
the Road Scholars?
Road Scholar. It's my first Road Scholar experience. I'm looking forward to it. Yes.
Only that you checked with your doctor with the altitude, right? So that would be
Yes.
something maybe when we're younger, we wouldn't even think to ask about that, right?
Right.
But now that's something you just say, well,
Well, I had a TIA last year, which is like a little minor heart problem, and I'm on medication for it. So I wanted to be sure that I wasn't doing anything that might put me at risk, and he had no qualms about my going.
wonderful. So I think
yeah.
that's a great example of try something new,
Yes.
do it with people perhaps you don't know, you're going to be traveling,
Yes.
yet being responsible to yourself in terms of, is there anything I need to think about with where I find myself right now?
Yeah.
Get that all kind of vetted and off you go, right?
Well, otherwise, you have a choice. Otherwise, you're just going to remain in sort of a little shell and never reach out and have new experiences. Life is too short to put those barriers around yourself. We women have enough barriers to overcome without erecting our own.
Well said, absolutely. And how long have you been writing senior moments for the
Oh, only
Register?
about 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And, that's sort of how it happened, I guess, is rather typical of me. I don't know whether it's a brashness, but I'm always willing to politely try something. I noticed that their senior writer was no longer writing. He had moved, his name was Al something or other, Al Sizer. He had moved to Arizona, so they had no senior column. So I picked up the phone one day and asked for the feature editor, and a very nice gentleman answered, and I said, I have an idea for a senior column, and I notice you don't have one now. And he said, oh, well, what have you written for seniors? And I said, nothing. And he said, well, what makes you think you can? And I said, well, I just think I can. And he said, well, send me some samples, and we'll take a look. So I went home and said to my husband, well, I've put my foot in it, and I wrote 4 samples, and he said, well, give it a try. That was 4 years ago.
Wonderful.
But the worst that could have happened is he wouldn't have liked it, and that would have ended that. So I think you should always, if you have an idea, nothing to lose by trying.
Absolutely. And it's a weekly column, right?
It is weekly. It appears every Sunday, usually right above the TV guide.
Okay,
That's my spot.
all right. And you were recently honored by the Combined Chambers of Commerce on Connecticut's shoreline.
Yes,
How
yes.
did that come about, or what was that
Well,
like?
that was a big surprise to me. Apparently, they have a Woman of Excellence award, which really is a combination of what you're doing in business and what you're doing for the community. And I am on the advisory board for the agency in aging. And as you point out, I do try to help people who have a problem and need a resource, whatever it might be in terms of the aging field. And that was a big surprise to me and delightful. Ted Kennedy was there and Rosa DeLaura, and so I really went home feeling very, very special.
Yes, and you shared some wisdom. You had an acceptance speech, right?
Well, I mentioned that I feel strongly that women need to help other women. Not that we shouldn't give a hand to a young man or an older man for that matter as well, but I think especially women need to help other women. And looking back on my career, I think at almost every important juncture, it was a woman who helped me.
Well,
It's
let's talk
interesting.
about that a little bit, because you got out of school with a political science major, right?
Yes, yes.
And now what?
I got out of school as a political science major and, of course, looked for a job in New York. And at that time, nobody knew what to do with a political science major. And they said, well, that's nice, honey. Can you type?
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I was a good typist. Got a job with an ad agency. Happened to be a small agency run by two women.
Wonderful.
One day, one of the copywriters got sick. And one of the owners said to me, do you think you could fill in and write some copy? And not being at all sure that I could, I said, oh, of course. So that was the start of copywriting for me.
And
So
how long did you do that?
I did that for several years, and then I met this charming young man and decided to marry him, and his company offered him a job in Chicago. And when I got to Chicago, they said, well, can you write about McCormick reapers and farm equipment? And I said no, and really wasn't interested. And again, it was a woman at the employment agency where I went looking for copywriting work who said, we really don't have anything. Would you like a desk here at the agency? And I became an employment counselor while we were in Chicago. So I've had a very checkered career since we moved around a lot.
Were you also in retail?
Yes,
When did you do that?
yes. Actually, after the copywriting job, before I met my husband, after the copywriting job, almost again a fluke, I went for an interview and saw the wrong person, and they started to interview me for a much more advanced job, which was being a fashion consultant and traveling the New England territory and doing department store promotions. And halfway through the interview, the woman, Erlene Griffith, asked me what agency had sent me, and I said, no agency, I came here for something else. And she said, well, I think you'd be perfect for this. But I was the youngest one they ever hired, and she argued against the two male sales managers who said she's too young, and she hired me.
So I think you saw the right person, not the wrong person,
Yes,
right?
yes. But I've had a great deal of luck along the way, but it's been women right along, and certainly this last position, I walked into a real estate company one day, just because I had started my own business. In my 70s, I had left a company where I had worked for a number of years. They went bankrupt, and that was a assisted living community. And they finally went bankrupt, and everyone was let go. And I, at that point, was quite well qualified for that kind of work. But I was in my 70s, and when I sent out resumes, I didn't get any answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I'm going to start my own business. I know there's a need. And I did. But having your own business is either feast or famine. And since I had been in real estate as well, I walked into a small realty company thinking, well, maybe I can make some sort of referral arrangement. Again, a woman by the name of Maureen Campbell, who had done a lot of relocation work, listened to what I did and said, we ought to start a whole division. Would you come on and help me start a whole division?
And that's one of the reasons I think the title Career Innovator applies to you. And so about how long ago was that?
That was 13 years ago, and we were with a boutique company for 13 years, and in Memphis, that is nationwide. She was offered the vice presidency and asked me to come with her. So we are responsible for developing New England. So it's quite a challenge.
That's amazing. And really there was, as we spoke a little before we started taping, you said, I'm not the very first to do this, but those ideas are out there, and who catches them, and who makes an opportunity for themselves, and who
Right.
has the confidence, right, to just say,
What's the worst that can
let's
happen?
put on a show, right?
Right.
Yeah, open the
Right.
door and step in.
Yes, yes.
And then a fascinating part of your background, which we're going to show some of the images,
Okay.
are the 4 years you spent in Japan,
Yes.
which we could do 2 or 3 segments probably on your experiences
Yes.
in Japan.
Yeah, that was a unique experience.
So this was when your children were very young,
Yes.
and your husband had this opportunity to go and be a mechanical engineer, I believe?
Yeah,
or-
well, he had an opportunity to work on the very first atomic power plant that Japan was building. We, of course, later saw the tsunami that absolutely decimated it, and that was rather shocking.
Yes, yes. And so there you are, not having the language, you're in somewhat of a rural community, you're not part of like a whole
No,
American expat
no,
group?
not at all.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Okay,
You lived as the Japanese did.
okay.
Really,
And by
literally.
your wits,
And,
right?
yeah, well,
I mean, for you, in terms of having to manage.
pretty much, yes.
And so your children and getting them in school and helping them through some
Well,
homeschooling
I
and.
did some homeschooling, and I'm not that good a teacher, although to this day, when my older son picks up a book, I look at him and I think, I did that.
Yeah,
I taught him to read, and so that's a permanent pleasure that no one can take away.
yes. And let's just highlight the story about an article you ended up writing against perhaps the initial reaction of the owner of the company.
Well, of course, Japan was, and this is 60 years ago, and still is, very much a male-dominated society. It's just part of their culture, and they have many lovely things about the culture. That's one that's very difficult, especially for American women. I had found out that there was a small little local magazine which was just being put out for tourists. It would cover like New Haven County, so it covered Kanagawa Prefecture, which is like a county. And they assigned a very nice interpreter to me because I was going to go around and discover things that might interest the usual tourist. Well, apparently, the head of a large electric company, Showa Electric, had written the magazine and wanted an article about his company. He was located in that prefecture. And so they assigned me to this. Well, when I appeared at the company and the president of the company realized that this was a woman that had come, he assigned somebody else. He would not take me around. He was really, he felt belittled, I think,
Okay.
looking at it from his standpoint, that they would send, a woman to write
And an
this.
American woman.
And an American woman. Well, it had to be somebody who knew English,
Okay.
but a woman, and particularly on a technical subject. So I went around and made a lot of notes, came home, and fortunately, my husband, the engineer, was there to help me, and I said, honey, this has got to be a bang-up article. Well, we did a really good article. After the publication, a limo appears at my little house one day, and it's the president of the company who's come to see me and wants to know, can they use this in their advertising and their publicity? Will I give him a release to use this? And I also coined a sort of a phrase that they use now in all their literature to this day. Showa Electric is the cable that encircles the globe, and that's still to this day on all their literature. But that gave me great pleasure because here was a man learning a lesson that was the antithesis of his upbringing. A foreign woman was able to do something that was really good for his company. He was amazed, and I will say on his behalf, he accepted it then rather graciously.
And appeared in person now. Is that something culturally that must have had some significance to
I
it,
really
right?
don't know, but he had to get the permission, so I guess he felt he better come himself. Because if I had wanted to, I could have said, no, I'm not going to give you permission to use that.
And what was your husband's reaction?
Oh, he was so pleased. He was very pleased.
To be partners in crime.
No, my husband has always been very understanding of my need to work, even sometimes when it interfered with his being able to have an easier time of it. Fortunately, he was a very good cook, so he did the weekend cooking and helped a lot.
Great. And what issues do you see younger women facing today?
Well, I've always worked even when the children were small. I think in some ways perhaps more difficult, and in some ways it's easier. It's more accepted that they will work. They have a big investment in their education. I don't think, like other countries, we've come very far in terms of helping them in having paid child care. But at least it is accepted now. When I went back to work, a lot of people thought it was terrible, and I at times felt like a bad mother because I did go back to work when the children were quite young. But it was either that or I said to the children, I'm going to, murder you in your beds if I have to be with you 24/7. It was not part of me.
Yes.
So I think, like any working mother, there were things that they missed out on. There were disadvantages. There were times that I wasn't there for them. But I also think that there were great advantages, that maybe they learned to do certain things on their own out of necessity.
And I read about this a lot, and it does seem like one aspect for younger women is that there can be a lot of talk that there are going to be shared responsibilities, but when the rubber hits the road and the children come along, something has to give.
Sometimes, of course, now I see a lot of grandparents that are taking active roles and being very helpful. I think perhaps the difference now, when I think about it, is women almost have to work in order to meet the budgetary requirements, where in my case it was something I wanted to do, but financially, although it would have been more difficult, but financially, if I had not wanted to, I could have chosen to stay home. Now I think it's almost not a choice anymore for women, and that's just as bad. Women who want to be home with their children should be able to be, but they pay a terrific price in terms of that lapse in their career.
Yes, trying to restart, let alone the income that you forego during the years you're not working. And I mean, over the years, you're not contributing to a pension plan. Consequences down the road as well.
Right,
So,
yes.
yeah.
And families now are more spread out. Some families are fortunate that grandparents are nearby, and I think they can play a very important role because they're coming from a different time. I think they have lessons that only they can impart. I think we all have to try to find what seems to be a good fit for us, and sometimes that's a matter of trial and error.
And looking back, what advice would you give your younger Jean?
I don't think there's anything that I would do over. I think I've always, if an opportunity presented itself, I've always just said, let's go with it. So I don't think I have really any regrets.
That's wonderful. And if at times you felt like a bad mom, you knew that there was pluses and minuses and
Right,
get through it and
right.
trust.
I could not, if I had it to do over, I could not stay home.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's just not me.
Yeah.
If anything, maybe I should have only had one child instead of three. Maybe that would have been easier, but I don't know. I'm glad I have the other two as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know.
I always like to close with a quote. So would you like to share your quote from Mae West?
Yes, Mae West, for those of you who haven't been around quite as long as I have, was a very brash and sort of ahead of her time woman. And she had a saying that I rather like. Mae West always said, you only live once, but once is enough if you do it right. And I think that's true.
It seems like you've certainly have done that expression proud. So thank you so much for
Thank you,
sharing your rich
Georgiana, for being
experiences.
here.
Absolutely. And
Delightful.
please tune into your other fascinating stories from women in future segments of Midlife Matters. Georgian Lussier, your host. Thanks for watching.